Do you think El Silbón is just another folk tale? A simple, scary story told to frighten children in the Venezuelan plains? What if I told you that the truth behind this legend has been systematically suppressed for over 2 centuries? That government agencies across South America have worked tirelessly to reduce one of history's most terrifying supernatural phenomena to nothing more than local folklore? The whistling spirit, the bag carrier, the harbinger of death. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the truth about El Silbón, a truth that powerful institutions have fought to keep hidden since the early 1800s. What you're about to hear has been pieced together from sealed colonial archives, suppressed academic research, and testimonies from those who have encountered the entity and lived to tell about it. Many who have investigated this phenomenon have disappeared. Others have abandoned their research entirely, refusing to speak of what they discovered. Let me be clear. This is not entertainment. This is a warning. It begins in 1807 in the vast grasslands of Los Llanos that stretch across Venezuela and Colombia. Colonial records recovered from a fire that destroyed most of the regional government archives in 1853 describe the first documented case of what would later be known as El Silbón. The partial records mention a wealthy landowner named Don Guillermo Herrera, whose son, whose name has been redacted from all surviving documents, brutally murdered his father after a heated dispute. The official colonial record simply states that the son was executed for patricide, a common crime, a simple punishment, case closed. But it wasn't. 3 separate accounts from the period, discovered in private correspondence now held in a temperature-controlled vault at the University of Caracas, tell a very different story. These letters, which university officials have repeatedly denied, exist despite photographic evidence, describe what really happened. The murder wasn't simple. It was methodical, ritualistic. The son didn't just kill his father. He removed his organs, preserved them, arranged them according to a pattern that colonial officials could not comprehend. His grandmother, upon discovering what he had done, cursed him before his execution. The words of this curse appear in all 3 accounts, identical despite being written by different witnesses. You will forever carry the burden of your father's remains. You will hunger, but never eat, thirst, but never drink. Dogs will chase you across the plains for all eternity. Your whistle will herald death. The execution was carried out that same night. The grandmother ordered him whipped with a bull's nerve, rubbed with hot chili pepper, and then released into the plains with hunting dogs set upon him. The colonial record notes simply, "Justice served." 7 days later, the first whistling was heard. 3 ranch hands at an estate bordering the Herrera property reported hearing an unusual whistling sequence at approximately 2 hours past midnight on June 17, 1807. The sound followed the musical notes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, descending and then ascending again. The whistling seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. All 3 men were found dead the following morning. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces. Colonial officials attributed the deaths to poisoning from an unknown plant. The report was filed. The case was closed, but it was only beginning. 2 weeks later, another estate, 5 deaths. The same musical whistling reported by a house servant who had been too ill to join the others in the field. She described the sound as beautiful but wrong. When pressed to explain what she meant, she could only say, it was like hearing someone practice an instrument they've never played before, using a human throat. The deaths continued. The colonial government responded by sending a special investigator, Captain Alejandro Rojas, to examine the situation. His official reports mention only suspicious deaths potentially linked to poisoning or native insurrection. But his private journal, discovered in 1978 in his descendant's attic in Bogotá, tells the true story. On the night of July 30, 1807, Rojas himself heard the whistling. He wrote, "The sound came from directly above me, yet when I looked up, nothing was there. It moved around me in a circle, always maintaining the same distance. The melody was precise, mechanical, yet somehow conveyed an impression of hunger. I felt as though I was not hearing it with my ears, but rather feeling it within my chest. my lantern extinguished despite there being no wind. In the darkness, I saw a figure, impossibly tall and thin, silhouetted against the night sky, though there was no moon. It carried what appeared to be a sack over its shoulder, from which protruded shapes I refused to identify even in this private account. Rojas left Los Llanos the next day. His official recommendation was to evacuate 3 ranches and burn the surrounding grassland. The colonial governor declined the recommendation. Rojas resigned his commission 1 week later and moved to Spain, where he lived in seclusion until his death in 1841. His death certificate lists the cause as heart failure, but his personal physician noted that Rojas died while staring in terror at the bedroom window, through which came a sound like whistling. By 1820, as Venezuela fought for independence from Spain, colonial records regarding the phenomenon became sporadic, but local accounts began to crystallize into a consistent pattern. The entity was always preceded by its distinctive whistling. It carried a sack containing bones that would sometimes rattle with impossible rhythm, matching its whistle. It appeared primarily to men traveling alone at night, especially those who were drunk or unfaithful to their partners. Most significantly, they say, proximity of the whistling indicated how much danger you were in. If the whistling sounded distant, death was imminent. If it sounded close, you still had time to escape. This inversion of normal acoustic principles has never been explained. What most modern accounts of El Silbón fail to mention is the classified investigation conducted by the newly formed Venezuelan government in 1832. President José Antonio Páez, after losing 3 military advisors to unexplained deaths, all preceded by reports of whistling, authorized a secret expedition to investigate what he called in private correspondence the Whistling Devil of Los Llanos. The expedition consisted of 7 men, 4 soldiers, a priest, a doctor, and a native guide familiar with the region. They departed from Caracas on April 15, 1832. Their official mission was to survey land for potential military outposts. Only the guide returned. The official report, sealed until 1967 and even now heavily redacted, contains the guide's testimony. He described how each night the whistling would surround their camp. Each morning, they would find animal carcasses arranged in precise geometric patterns around their tents, the organs removed and missing. On the 6th night, the whistling came from within their camp. The guide's testimony states, "It was among us, moving between the tents. I could see its shadow, tall as 3 men, thin as a reed. The bones in its sack clicked together like a conversation. The priest began reciting prayers, but his words turned to screams. I ran. I should not have run, but I ran. Behind me, the whistling changed. It was laughing." The guide was found 3 days later, wandering deliriously in the plains. He was the only survivor. He committed suicide 2 weeks later by severing his own tongue and bleeding to death. His final written words were simply, "It follows me still. It wants me to hear the song forever." President Páez ordered all records of the expedition sealed and began the process of transforming the entity into folklore, a superstition rather than a reality. This marked the beginning of the systematic suppression of information regarding El Silbón that continues to this day. Throughout the 19th century, the phenomenon continued. Colonial census records from the region show an unusual pattern. Approximately every 7 years, the death rate in specific areas of Los Llanos would increase by 27% for a period of exactly 30 days. These statistical anomalies were officially attributed to disease outbreaks, despite medical records showing no consistent cause of death beyond heart failure or unknown causes. By the early 20th century, the legend of El Silbón had been firmly established in Venezuelan folklore. The transformation from documented phenomenon to superstition was complete. Official mentions of unexplained deaths preceded by whistling disappeared from government records. Academic research into the historical accounts was discouraged. Manuscripts were rejected by publishers, and researchers found their funding mysteriously cut. But the deaths continued. In 1943, an American oil exploration team operating in Venezuela reported hearing unusual whistling sounds at their remote camp. Their reports were detailed, describing the sound as moving through solid objects, and seeming to come from inside our own heads. 3 days after making radio contact about these sounds, communication with the team was lost. The rescue expedition found their camp intact but completely empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just a series of photographs they'd taken, showing elongated shadows that couldn't be matched to any object in the camp. These photographs were classified by the U.S. government and remained so until 2001, when a Freedom of Information Act request revealed their existence, though the actual images remain unreleased. The official explanation was mass desertion, despite all personal belongings, and vehicles remaining at the site. The pattern continued throughout the decades. In 1962, a team of anthropologists from the University of Caracas attempted to document the folklore surrounding El Silbón. Their study was abruptly terminated when 3 of the 5 researchers died in their sleep on the same night. Autopsy results showed no cause of death, but local witnesses reported hearing whistling around the research station just before midnight. The remaining 2 researchers abandoned academia entirely. One, Dr. Elena Contreras, broke her silence in 1980 during an interview with an obscure paranormal magazine. She described finding her colleagues twisted into impossible positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror so profound that I still see them when I close my eyes. The magazine was purchased by a media conglomerate 1 month after publication and immediately shut down. All copies of that issue seemed to disappear from circulation. Dr. Contreras herself disappeared in 1981. Her family received postcards from her for years afterward, claiming she was traveling through South America, but handwriting analysis later revealed these were forgeries. Perhaps most disturbing is the pattern that emerged in the digital age. Beginning in 1998, internet forums dedicated to Venezuelan folklore began collecting modern encounters with El Silbón. A pattern emerged that had never been documented in the traditional folklore. The entity appeared to be evolving. Multiple accounts described El Silbón no longer just targeting the drunk or unfaithful, but those who specifically sought information about it, those who researched too deeply, those who told its story. The whistling was reported coming from computer speakers, phone receivers, and eventually digital assistants in smartphones. In 2007, exactly 200 years after the original incident, Venezuela experienced what officials called a telecommunications anomaly that affected the entire country for 7 minutes. During this time, thousands reported hearing a distinctive whistling coming through every electronic device capable of producing sound: phones, radios, televisions, speakers, all simultaneously broadcasting the same 7-note sequence. The government blamed it on a cascading system failure. Technology experts pointed to impossible coincidences required for such a synchronized event. Most disturbing were the 27 deaths recorded during those exact 7 minutes, all without apparent cause, all with expressions of horror frozen on their faces. The pattern has continued into the present day. In 2019, a viral video emerged purporting to show El Silbón captured on a security camera in rural Colombia. The footage showed an impossibly tall, thin figure moving with unnatural speed along a road, carrying what appeared to be a sack over its shoulder. The video accumulated over 3 million views in 24 hours before being removed for community guidelines violations. The original uploader's account was deleted, and internet archives show their entire digital presence disappeared within days. What makes the El Silbón phenomenon different from other folklore is the consistency of accounts across time and geography, the documented history of information suppression, and the statistical anomalies that cannot be explained by conventional means. Consider the evidence: colonial records documenting a specific origin incident. 2 centuries of consistent encounter reports with identical descriptive elements, multiple government investigations that were subsequently classified, statistical death patterns that correlate with reported sightings, systematic academic suppression of research, evolution of the phenomenon in response to technology and information sharing. The Venezuelan government established a dedicated unit within their national security apparatus in 1973, specifically to monitor and suppress information related to El Silbón. This unit, officially designated for cultural heritage protection, has been linked to the disappearance of at least 17 researchers, journalists, and witnesses who attempted to document encounters with the entity. A declassified memo from this unit, dated 1988, explicitly states their mission. The phenomenon must remain folklore. Classification as superstition ensures containment. Classification as reality risks proliferation. What exactly did they mean by proliferation? Multiple accounts across decades suggest that El Silbón isn't simply a spirit or entity. It's something that spreads through knowledge. The more people who believe in its reality, who understand its true nature, the stronger it becomes, the more it can manifest. This may explain the systematic efforts to reduce it to mere folklore, to transform documented historical events into campfire stories, to make you right now dismiss what you're hearing as fiction. Because that's safer. But consider this. The pattern of El Silbón manifestations has accelerated dramatically in the internet age. As information becomes impossible to completely suppress, the entity appears with increasing frequency. The Colombian National Police have a classified file linking over 40 unexplained deaths between 2015 and 2023 to reports of whistling, a file whose existence they vehemently deny. Audio analysis experts at the University of Texas examined 17 different recordings of the supposed El Silbón whistle captured between 1974 and 2022. Their findings, published briefly before being retracted, indicated that all 17 recordings shared impossible acoustic properties. The sound appeared to have no point of origin, existed at multiple frequencies simultaneously, and contained subharmonic elements that should not exist in natural acoustics. The research team disbanded after their funding was cut. The lead researcher, Dr. Mark Atkins, posted a single message on social media before deleting all his accounts. It knows. We're analyzing it. It's in the recordings. If you listen too many times, you'll hear it when the recording isn't playing. Perhaps most disturbing are the consistent elements that appear in victim accounts shortly before encounters. Many report a specific dream the night before, walking through an endless grassland while hearing distant whistling that never grows closer no matter how long they walk. They report waking with the taste of bone ash in their mouths. Some describe seeing elongated shadows from objects that should cast none. In 2020, during the global pandemic lockdowns, a disturbing correlation emerged. In regions where El Silbón folklore was prevalent, a statistically impossible number of people reported hearing whistling outside their homes during the hours of lockdown. These reports created geographical clusters that moved systematically across Venezuela, Colombia, and parts of Brazil over a 30-day period. The pattern of movement, when mapped, created a perfect spiral, centered on the original location from the 1807 incident. Authorities attributed the reports to mass hysteria amplified by isolation and social media. But this explanation cannot account for the precise geographical pattern, nor the fact that many reports came from individuals with no social media presence and no knowledge of others' experiences. The entity appears to be reaching beyond its traditional boundaries. In 2021, the first confirmed reports of El Silbón encounters emerged from outside South America. 3 separate incidents in Texas, Florida, and California involved witnesses describing identical experiences: the distinctive 7-note whistle, sightings of an impossibly tall figure carrying a sack, and the smell of old bones and wet earth. All 3 incidents involved individuals who had never heard of the El Silbón legend and had no connection to Venezuelan culture. 2 of these witnesses died within weeks of their encounters. The third, a 43-year-old teacher from San Diego, disappeared after leaving a voice message for her sister that contained only ambient noise and what audio experts identified as distant whistling getting progressively closer. The proliferation continues to accelerate. Internet searches for El Silbón have increased by 3,700% since 2019. Video content about the legend has accumulated over 200 million views across platforms. The entity is becoming known globally. Exactly the scenario that Venezuelan authorities have worked for 2 centuries to prevent. But why? What happens when belief in El Silbón reaches a critical mass, when it transitions fully from folklore to acknowledged reality? The pattern suggests something is building toward a threshold event. Consider what you're doing right now. You're learning about El Silbón. You're considering the possibility of its reality. You're becoming part of the pattern. Have you noticed any unusual sounds while consuming this information? Any strange whistling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere? Any unusual shadows in your peripheral vision? You might dismiss such thoughts as the power of suggestion. That's the rational response, the safe response. But across 2 centuries of documented encounters, there is one consistent element reported by survivors. They all say the same thing. I knew it was real the moment I heard the whistle. Not before. I didn't believe until that exact moment, and by then, it was almost too late. The most recently documented encounter occurred on October 12, 2023. A group of hikers in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia reported hearing whistling that moved around them in impossible ways for 3 consecutive nights. On the 3rd night, they captured an audio recording and photographed what they described as a figure at least 9 feet tall, impossibly thin, moving between trees faster than should be possible. Both the audio and photographs were uploaded to multiple social media platforms simultaneously. Within hours, every upload was removed for community guidelines violations. Within days, all 5 hikers' social media accounts were deleted entirely. 2 of the hikers have not been seen since. The other 3 refused to speak about the experience, but copies of the audio were downloaded before removal. Analysis showed the whistling contained embedded frequencies that aren't normally perceptible to human hearing, but affect brain activity in the temporal lobe, the region associated with fear responses and supernatural beliefs. Simply put, the whistle itself changes how your brain processes information about El Silbón. It makes you believe. And belief is what it needs to spread. Historical accounts suggest that El Silbón was originally confined to the region where the initial incident occurred. For decades, it could not manifest beyond Los Llanos. But as knowledge of it spread, so did its range. With each person who hears its story, who considers its reality, who searches for information about it, its boundaries expand. You are expanding those boundaries right now. Some researchers who have subsequently disappeared suggested that El Silbón isn't a traditional spirit or ghost, but something older, something that existed before the 1807 incident and merely used it as a vessel to enter our world. The grandmother's curse wasn't the creation of the entity, but its invitation. The whistling isn't just a warning, it's a message, a communication. Linguistic analysis of the 7-note pattern reveals it matches the phonetic structure of a phrase in an indigenous language that predates Spanish colonization. The phrase translates roughly to, "I am coming closer." Each time the story spreads, it comes closer. Venezuelan shamans from regions near Los Llanos have traditions predating the 1807 incident that refer to the tall one who whistles between worlds. These traditions include specific protections against hearing the whistle, plugging ears with a mixture of ash and salt, surrounding sleeping areas with circles of bone, and most importantly, never acknowledging the whistle if heard. One consistent element across all protection rituals is the instruction never to look directly at the entity if encountered. Those who see only its shadow or silhouette may survive. Those who look directly at its face never do. No description of this face exists in any account. Those who have seen it have not lived to describe it. But here's what's truly disturbing. The frequency of encounters has been increasing exponentially. Historical records show approximately 7 confirmed encounters per decade throughout the 19th century. This increased to roughly 20 per decade through the 20th century. Since 2000, there have been over 300 documented encounters. Since 2020, nearly 1,000. It's accelerating, spreading, evolving. Modern accounts include new elements never reported historically. Multiple witnesses now report hearing the whistling through electronic devices even when powered off. Others describe the entity appearing in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, phone screens, visible only in the reflection, never in the room itself. Most concerning is the new pattern of behavior reported since 2018. The entity no longer simply appears, whistles, and causes death. It now seems to stalk certain targets for days or weeks. Victims report hearing the distant whistling for up to 30 days before direct encounter. Each day, the whistling comes from a closer location. This suggests a fundamental change in the entity's nature, from an instinctive supernatural force to something with deliberate intent. It's learning, adapting, hunting more strategically. And now you know about it. This brings us to the most troubling question. Why am I telling you this? Why risk spreading knowledge that seems to strengthen the very entity I'm warning you about? Because containment has failed, suppression has failed, the threshold approaches regardless. Your only protection now is awareness, understanding. The ability to recognize what's happening when, not if, you hear that whistling. If you hear a 7-note whistle that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, that moves around you in impossible ways, do not acknowledge it. Do not search for its source. Do not record it or try to communicate with it. Above all, if you glimpse a tall, thin figure carrying a sack, do not look directly at it. Cover your ears with a mixture of ash and salt if possible. Create a circle around your sleeping area. Salt will work if bone is unavailable. And most importantly, tell no one about what you experienced. Each person who learns of your encounter creates another potential vessel for manifestation. The entity doesn't just target those who hear its whistle, it targets those who know it exists, those who believe, those who spread its story. Like I'm doing now, like you might do after finishing this. The original sin wasn't the son murdering his father in 1807. It was the transformation of that crime into something that could spread through knowledge, through belief, through story. Each telling, each hearing, each moment of belief feeds it, including this one. Listen carefully now, not to my words, but to your surroundings. Is there a sound like distant whistling? Does it seem to be coming from behind you or from inside your own head? Is it getting closer as you continue to absorb this information? That might just be your imagination. The power of suggestion. The mind creating patterns where none exist. But across Los Llanos tonight, as on every night for over 200 years, the whistling is real. The tall figure moves between worlds, carrying its sack of bones, bones that once belonged to its father, now joined by countless others. It whistles its 7 notes. It watches from impossible heights. It waits for belief to bring it closer, and now it's closer to you, if you've stayed with me. If, this far, you're part of the pattern now. The knowledge is within you. The potential for belief. The possibility of hearing that whistle someday, perhaps tonight, perhaps years from now when you've almost forgotten this story. When you hear it, remember, if it sounds distant, it's already too close. If it sounds close, you still have time to run. But where can you run when the entity exists in belief itself? When your own knowledge of it creates the pathway for manifestation? I've studied this phenomenon for 17 years. I've collected accounts, analyzed patterns, traced its evolution. 3 times, I've heard the whistling myself, each time more clearly than the last. I'm sharing this information now because the pattern has changed again. For 2 centuries, El Silbón has been gradually expanding its reach, its power, its manifestation capacity. But something shifted in 2020. The acceleration became exponential. The entity is no longer simply spreading, it's preparing for what? I don't know. But every pattern, every statistical analysis, every historical parallel points to a threshold event approaching. A point at which quantitative change becomes qualitative transformation. If you've heard of El Silbón before, you've already taken the first step toward potential encounter. If this is your first exposure to the entity, you've just taken that step. The knowledge cannot be unlearned, the pattern cannot be broken once joined. But awareness provides some protection. Understanding the rules, limited as they are, gives you a chance. Don't whistle after dark in open spaces. Don't investigate unusual sounds that follow the 7-note pattern. Don't look directly at unusually tall, thin figures glimpsed in your peripheral vision. Don't acknowledge the sound of rattling bones. And most importantly, be careful who you share this information with. Each person who learns of El Silbón becomes another potential encounter point, another vessel for manifestation. Another link in the chain that stretches back to 1807. The whistling is getting closer. Not just to you or me, but to everyone. The boundaries thin. The entity spreads. Listen carefully tonight, not just with your ears, but with your entire awareness, because El Silbón is no longer just a Venezuelan legend. It's no longer contained to Los Llanos or South America. It exists wherever its story is known. It exists here, now, in your awareness, in your belief or disbelief. And it's whistling your way. Can you hear it yet? Hear it?